The shuttle shook hard as it dropped through the docking field of Thresia Prime. Kale Vasquez grabbed the armrest and held on tight. Through the small window, she could see the station stretching out in every direction, like a city floating in space. Towers of white metal and blue glass reached upward. Ships moved in slow lines around the station, like fish swimming around a reef. It was the biggest thing she had ever seen. She was 19 years old. She was human, and she was very, very far from home. The shuttle landed with a heavy thud, and the doors slid open. Warm air rushed in, carrying a strange, sweet smell that Kale could not place. She picked up her single bag, slung it over her shoulder, and stepped out into the arrival hall. It was chaos. Hundreds of alien cadets moved through the massive space, and every single one of them was bigger than her. A group of Dravuni pushed past her, without even looking down. They were reptilian giants, each one standing over 8 feet tall, with thick scaled skin and 4 powerful arms. Their footsteps made the floor vibrate. Behind them walked a line of Veloxi, tall insectoid creatures with shining black exoskeletons and sharp compound eyes that seemed to look everywhere at once. They moved with a quick, clicking precision that made Kale feel slow and clumsy. She saw Siltheri gliding through the crowd like they were made of light. They were tall and thin, with pale silver skin, and the air around them shimmered with faint energy. They did not walk so much as float, and other species moved out of their way with obvious respect. Kale was 5 feet 6 inches tall. She weighed 130 pounds. She had brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, and calloused hands from years of manual work on a colony world that could barely afford to send her here. She looked like nobody. A Veloxi cadet stopped and stared down at her with its many eyes. It made a clicking sound that her translator chip turned into words. "What species is this? I have not seen one before." "Human," Kale said. The Veloxi tilted its head. "Tier 9, it said, and walked away. It said those 2 words the same way someone might say, trash. Kale kept walking. The orientation ceremony was held in the grand atrium, a huge open hall with a ceiling so high it disappeared into soft white light. Thousands of cadets stood in neat rows, organized by species. The human contingent was small. There were only 12 of them, the first humans ever admitted to the Galactic Union Academy. They stood at the very back, in the very last row, and no one turned around to look at them. The Academy director, an ancient Silthari with dim silver skin and tired eyes, gave a speech about excellence and duty and the honor of serving the Galactic Union. Kale barely listened. She was watching the other cadets. She was studying how they moved, how they stood, which ones looked confident, and which ones looked afraid. It was a habit she had learned young. On her colony world, you watched people carefully, or you did not last long. After the speech came the indexing. Every cadet walked through a tall archway made of dark crystal. The archway scanned them, measured them, and judged them. It tested psionic ability, energy affinity, neural processing speed, physical strength, and a dozen other categories that Kale did not fully understand. The results appeared instantly on a massive crystalline board that floated above the center of the atrium, visible to everyone. The Dravuni cadets scored high in physical power. The Veloxi dominated neural processing and combat reflexes. The Silthari lit up the energy affinity charts like stars. Name after name appeared on the board, each one glowing with proud numbers. Then Kale walked through the archway. The crystal hummed. It flickered. For a moment, nothing appeared on the board at all, and she heard a few confused murmurs from the crowd. Then her results posted. Psionic index, null. Energy affinity, inert. Neural processing, adequate. Combat potential, minimal. Physical capacity, low. There was one line at the bottom that read, Physical resilience, anomalous, pending review, but it was small and gray, and no one noticed it. What everyone noticed was her overall rank. Out of 4,712 cadets at the academy, Kale Vasquez was ranked 4,712, dead last, not just in her cohort, in the entire school. The laughter started quietly, and then grew. A Dravani cadet pointed at the board and said something to his friends that made them roar. A group of Veloxi clicked rapidly in what Kale knew was their version of mockery. Even some of the other humans looked away from her, embarrassed. Kale looked up at her name, glowing at the very bottom of the board. She looked at it for a long time. Then she walked to her assigned quarters without saying a word. She had been placed in Rearguard Sigma, a squad that everyone knew was the dumping ground for cadets the Academy expected to fail. Her squadmates were waiting in their shared room when she arrived. There was Peak, a small amphibian Jorvan who flinched every time someone spoke too loudly. There was Daleth, a Melthari noble who had been stripped of her family title for some disgrace she refused to talk about. And there was Ront, a Kreth mechanic who was missing his left arm below the elbow, and who looked at Kale with one good eye and said, "So you are the famous last place?" "Yes." She dropped her bag on the empty bed and sat down. "They will eat us alive in the Crucible trials," Peak said quietly, his wide, wet eyes blinking fast. "Maybe," Kale said. That evening, Instructor Torvan came to inspect them. He was a Dravuni veteran, tall and scarred, with one of his forearms ending in a stump. He looked at each of them slowly, and his expression made it clear that he had drawn the short stick by being assigned to this squad. He stopped in front of Kale and looked down at her. She had to crane her neck just to meet his eyes. "Human," he said, "you scored the lowest in Academy history. You have no psionic talent, no energy affinity, no natural weapons, no armor, no speed advantage. The Crucible trials will break cadets far stronger than you." He leaned closer. "Go home while you still can." Kale looked up at him. She did not blink. She did not look away. "No," she said. Torvan stared at her for a long moment. Then he snorted, shook his head, and walked out. That night, long after the others had gone to sleep, Kale got out of bed. She pulled on her training clothes and left the room. She found the academy gym empty and dark, and she began to run. She ran until her legs burned, and then she kept running. She ran until her lungs screamed, and then she kept running. She had been told her whole life that she was not enough. Not strong enough, not smart enough, not special enough. And every single time, she had given the same answer. The Crucible trials began on a cold morning 3 weeks into the semester. The Academy gathered all the squads in the combat arena, a vast open space with shifting terrain that could be changed to simulate any environment. Sand could become ice, flat ground could crack open into canyons, the ceiling could rain fire. Rearguard Sigma stood at the far end, away from the other squads. No one wanted to stand near them. Being close to the lowest-ranked squad was like a disease that might spread. The first trial was simple. Each squad had to cross a combat zone while automated defense turrets fired stun rounds at them. The top squads went first. The Veloxi Primus squad moved like water through the course, their insectoid bodies bending and twisting with impossible speed. They finished in 4 minutes. The Dravuni Heavy Squad simply charged through the fire, their thick scales absorbing the stun rounds like they were nothing. They finished in 6 minutes, laughing the whole way. Then it was Rearguard Sigma's turn. They were given the worst starting position, the farthest from the finish line, with the most turrets aimed at their path. It was not an accident. Kale knew the Academy expected them to fail quickly and cleanly, so everyone could move on. She had other plans. The night before, she had studied the turret patterns. She had watched recordings of previous trials. She had mapped out the blind spots where the turrets could not aim because of their own mounting angles. And she had talked to Ront, the one-armed Kreth mechanic, about the turret's power cycling. They recharge every 8 seconds after a burst, Ront had said, tapping his remaining hand on the table. 8 seconds is not much. It is enough, Kale had said. Now, standing at the start line, she looked at her squad. Daleth's jaw was tight with anger, the kind of anger that came from having everything to prove. Ront just waited, calm and patient. Follow me, Kale said. Move when I move. Stop when I stop. Trust me. The horn sounded. Kale sprinted forward, counting in her head. 1, 2, 3. She dove left behind a low wall just as the turrets fired. The stun rounds cracked against the wall, sending sparks flying. 4, 5, 6. She was up again, running. She could hear her squad behind her, following her path exactly. 7, 8. The turrets cycled down. Now, she shouted, and they sprinted across an open gap that every other squad had taken hits crossing. They did not finish first. They finished 9th out of 20 squads, but they finished clean. Not a single member of Rearguard Sigma took a hit. The arena went quiet for a moment. 9th place was not impressive for a top squad, but for the squad ranked dead last, the squad everyone had bet would not even finish, it was something that did not make sense. A few instructors exchanged looks. Torvon, watching from the observation deck, said nothing, but he leaned forward in his seat. The second trial was combat. Each squad faced another in direct fighting, and Rearguard Sigma was matched against a mid-ranked Dravuni squad. 4 reptilian warriors, each one capable of crushing Kale with one hand. They lost. Of course they lost. But they lasted 11 minutes, when the expected time was 2. Kale fought the lead Dravuni herself, and while she could not match his strength, she could not be pinned down either. Every time he grabbed her, she twisted free. Every time he knocked her down, she stood back up. He hit her so hard that she slid across the floor and slammed into the wall, and the watching cadets winced. But Kale got up, spat blood, and came forward again. The Dravuni finally won by catching her in all 4 arms at once and lifting her off the ground. But as he held her up like a trophy, he was breathing hard. His arms were shaking. He had fought beings twice Kale's size in half the time, and none of them had tired him the way this small human had. He set her down almost gently and said, "You are stupid, but you are not weak." Kale wiped blood from her lip and nodded. The trials continued through the weeks. Rearguard Sigma never won, but they kept finishing, they kept surviving, and Kale kept getting better. She spent every free hour in the Academy library, reading everything she could find about alien biology. She learned that Dravuni had a cluster of nerves behind their lower left knee that if struck precisely would make their leg buckle. She learned that Veloxi could not track slow movements as well as fast ones, because their compound eyes were designed for speed. She learned that Silthari energy weaving required concentration, and a sudden loud noise at the right moment could break their focus. She shared everything with her squad, and slowly they began to change. Peak stopped flinching. He discovered that his species' natural ability to sense vibrations through the ground made him an incredible early warning system. Daleth's Melthari body could shift its density, making her nearly impossible to throw. Ront could fix, rebuild, or break any piece of technology with one hand faster than most cadets could with 2. They were not the best squad, but they were becoming something no one had expected them to become. They were becoming a team. The third trial was the one that changed everything. It was a survival scenario. Each squad was dropped into a simulated wilderness environment and had to reach an extraction point 40 hours later. The terrain was brutal. Steep rocky hills, thick mud, freezing rain, and automated predator drones that hunted them through the dark. 8 hours in, Peak fell from a rock face and broke his leg. The bone came through the skin, and he screamed in a high-pitched sound that hurt Kale's ears. The rules were clear. Any squad could call for medical extraction at any time. It meant automatic failure, but it meant survival. 3 of the top-ranked squads had already called for extraction. The conditions were worse than anyone had expected. Kale looked at Peak's leg. She looked at the terrain ahead. 12 kilometers of broken ground stood between them and the extraction point. "I can carry him," she said. Daleth stared at her. "That is 12 kilometers, over mountains, in this weather, with drones hunting us." She knelt down, and Peak climbed onto her back, whimpering with pain. He weighed almost as much as she did. She stood up, adjusted his weight, and started walking. She walked for 14 hours. She climbed over rocks, with Peak on her back. She pushed through mud that came up to her waist. When the predator drones found them, she ran with him, ducking and weaving, while Runt threw rocks to distract the machines. And Daleth blocked the path behind them. When she fell, she got up. When her legs cramped so badly she could barely stand, she kept going. The other squads at the extraction point saw them coming in the gray light of morning. They saw a small human woman carrying an amphibian on her back, covered in mud and blood, her legs shaking with every step, but still moving forward. Rearguard Sigma reached the extraction point with 20 minutes to spare. They had not quit. A Silfari cadet named Elindra watched from the medical tent as Kale finally set Peak down and collapsed to her hands and knees. Elindra had been one of the first to mock the humans when they arrived. She had called them primitive. She had called them fragile. Now she watched this fragile creature rise to her feet on legs that should not have been able to hold her. And she felt something she had never felt before when looking at a human. She felt afraid. "What is she?" Elindra whispered to the cadet beside her. No one had an answer. That evening, the Academy announced the next challenge, the Mid-Crucible event, something that happened only once per generation. Deep beneath the station, in a sealed chamber older than the Galactic Union itself, there was a vault. And in that vault, there was a weapon that had not moved in 6,000 years. They called it the Vault of Echoes, and every cadet would be given one chance to try what no one had ever done. Kale heard the announcement and looked down at her hands. They were bruised, cut, and shaking from exhaustion. She closed them into fists. The elevator descended for a long time. Kale counted the seconds in her head, a habit she had picked up during the Crucible trials. 60 seconds, 120, 180. They were going deep beneath the station, down into the ancient bones of Thressia Prime, into a part of the structure that was older than the Galactic Union itself. The elevator opened into a corridor carved from black stone. The walls were covered in symbols that no one could fully read. They were architect script, left behind by a species that had vanished from the galaxy over 6,000 years ago. The architects had built things that modern civilization still could not understand. They had shaped stars, they had folded space, and then, one day, they had simply disappeared. But they had left things behind, and the most famous of those things sat at the end of this corridor, in a round chamber lit by a pale blue glow that seemed to come from the stone itself. The Aegis of Rokan. Kale saw it the moment she stepped into the chamber, and she stopped breathing for a second. It was a warhammer, but calling it that felt wrong, like calling an ocean a puddle. The head of the hammer was made from something dark and dense, a material that seemed to pull light into itself. The haft was long, wrapped in something that looked like leather that shimmered faintly. The whole weapon sat on a raised platform of cracked stone, and the cracks spread outward from it in every direction like a web, as if the floor itself was being crushed by the hammer's weight. The air around it was thick and heavy. Kale could feel it in her chest, a pressure that made her heart work harder with every step closer. This was the gravity lock. The hammer generated its own gravitational field, a dense, crushing weight that pushed down on everything around it. Sensors placed around the chamber showed numbers that flickered between 8,000 and 12,000 kilograms of effective weight. 4,000 cadets filled the chamber's observation galleries, stacked in rising rows of seats that circled the platform. Every instructor was present. The academy director herself sat in the highest box, her silver Silthari skin catching the blue light. This was not just a test. It was a ritual, a tradition that went back generations. Every cadet would try. Every cadet would fail. And the lesson, as instructor Torvand had once said, was that some things were beyond all of them. The attempts began with the highest-ranked cadets, the Veloxi Primus, a tall insectoid named Sithrek, who had topped every combat ranking since he arrived, approached the hammer first. He crouched low, wrapped his segmented arms around the haft, and pulled with the full strength of his exoskeletal frame. The muscles under his black shell bunched and strained. Something in his left arm cracked, a sharp sound that echoed through the silent chamber. He let go, stumbling backward, cradling the arm. The hammer had not moved. Next came Gorax, the Dravuni champion. He was the largest cadet in the academy, a wall of muscle and scale, with 4 arms that could bend steel. He gripped the hammer with all 4 hands, set his feet wide, and pulled. His roar filled the chamber, shaking dust from the ceiling. Veins stood out on his neck like cables. His feet cracked the stone beneath them. He pulled for 30 seconds, 40, a full minute, screaming the entire time. The hammer sat still, perfectly, impossibly still. Gorax finally let go and dropped to his knees, gasping, his arms hanging limp. The Silthari tried a different approach. 3 of their strongest energy weavers stood in a triangle around the hammer and poured focused gravitational manipulation into it, trying to cancel out the gravity lock with their own power. The air shimmered and rippled. The blue light in the chamber flickered. Then the hammer pulsed once, a deep throb that Kale felt in her teeth, and it absorbed every bit of energy they had thrown at it. All 3 Silthari collapsed, unconscious. One by one, cadets tried. One by one, they failed. Some were carried out on stretchers. Most walked away with nothing worse than bruised pride and aching muscles. A few refused to accept failure, and tried until instructors pulled them away. The hammer never moved. Not a millimeter. Not a fraction. After 3 hours, the chamber was filled with the sounds of defeated cadets and quiet conversation. The ritual was almost over. The lesson had been taught. Then Kale stood up from her seat. The murmuring stopped. 4,000 pairs of eyes found the small human woman making her way down from the back row of the observation gallery. She was still bruised from the survival trial. There was still a fading cut above her left eye. She walked steadily, her face calm, her eyes fixed on the hammer. The laughter started before she reached the platform. It was not cruel at first, just disbelieving. A Veloxi clicked rapidly. A Dravuni snorted. Someone said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "The last place cadet wants to try the immovable weapon." How fitting. Kale stepped onto the platform. The gravity hit her immediately, a wave of pressure that pushed down on her shoulders and made her knees bend. She was closer to the hammer than most cadets had been, and she could feel its pull in her bones, a deep, grinding weight that wanted to press her flat against the stone. She walked to the hammer. Then she reached out and placed both hands on the haft. The chamber went quiet. The gravity lock responded to her touch. It surged. The pressure on her body doubled, then tripled. Kale's knees buckled, and she drops to one knee, her hands still gripping the haft. Blood vessels in her eyes burst, turning the whites red. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud and fast, and she could feel the hammer testing her, reading her, reaching into her body and her blood, and her history with something old and patient and vast. The architect technology did not measure strength. It did not measure psionic power or energy manipulation or processing speed. It measured something else entirely. It reached into the lifters' biology, into their evolutionary code, into millions of years of survival, written in their DNA. It looked for one thing: the capacity to endure. And it found a species forged in fire. It found a creature whose ancestors had chased prey across burning plains for hours until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. It found a body designed to sweat, to cool, to keep going when every other creature stopped. It found a mind that could feel pain and choose to ignore it, that could look at an impossible task and simply refuse to accept that it was impossible. It found adrenaline and stubbornness and rage and hope, all twisted together into something that burned like a quiet, endless flame. Kale screamed, not a scream of defeat, a scream of effort, of fury, of a girl who had been told her whole life that she was not enough, and had answered every single time with the same word. She pulled. The tendons in her arms stood out like wires, her muscles tore. Blood ran from her nose and dripped onto the dark stone. The gravity fought her, crushed her, tried to break her the way it had broken everyone else. But Kale Vasquez was human, and humans did not break. They bent, they bled, they cried, they suffered, but they did not break. The hammer shifted. A gasp rippled through the chamber. 4,000 cadets leaned forward. Instructors stood up. The academy director gripped the arms of her chair. Kale pulled harder. The hammer rose. 1 inch, 2, 6, a foot off the platform. The gravity lock screamed, a deep harmonic tone that vibrated through the entire station, through the walls and floors and the bones of every living being on Thresia Prime. She lifted it above her head. The Aegis of Rokan ignited. Light exploded from the hammer's head, a blinding white-blue fire that filled the chamber and cast sharp shadows up the walls. The ancient architect symbols on the walls began to glow, one by one, like stars waking up after a long sleep. The harmonic tone deepened, changed, became something almost like a voice. Kale stood on the platform with the hammer raised above her head. Blood ran from her eyes and nose. Her arms shook. Her legs shook. But she held it. She held it high, and the light poured from it like a river. In the deepest archives of the Academy, behind doors that had not opened in 1,000 years, a slab of black stone cracked down the middle. Behind the crack, carved in architect script that glowed with fresh light, was a message. The Academy's translation systems took 3 seconds to process it. The message read, "At last, the enduring ones have come." In the chamber, 4,000 cadets sat in absolute silence. No one laughed. No one moved. No one breathed. Kale lowered the hammer slowly and set it down. She stood for one more moment, swaying, blind with blood, her body broken in a dozen small ways. Then her legs gave out, and she fell. Peak was the first one to reach her, then Ront, then Daleth. They caught her before she hit the ground. They held her up the way she had held them up, all those weeks in the crucible. And above them, the ancient weapon pulsed with light, awake for the first time in 6,000 years, waiting for the girl who had refused to let go. Kale woke up in the medical bay with tubes in her arms and a dull ache in every part of her body. The lights above her were soft and white, and for a moment she did not remember where she was. Then the memory came back. The vault, the hammer, the light. She tried to sit up, and pain shot through her shoulders and down her spine. A medical drone floated over to her and gently pushed her back down. "You have 17 micro-tears in your muscle tissue," it said in a flat, pleasant voice. "4 cracked ribs, burst blood vessels in both eyes, minor internal bleeding in your left shoulder. You should not move for at least 48 hours. "How long have I been here?" Kale asked. 14 hours. The door opened, and Peak rushed in, his small amphibian body almost tripping over itself. Behind him came Ront and Daleth, and behind them, to Kale's surprise, came Ilindra, the Sulthari cadet who had once called humans primitive. They crowded around her bed, and Peak was talking so fast his translator could barely keep up. "The whole station is going crazy," he said. "Everyone is talking about you. The instructors are fighting. The Veloxi are furious. The Dravuni do not know what to think. In the Architect Archives, Kale. The archives are opening." Kale blinked her blood-red eyes. "What do you mean, opening?" Daleth stepped forward. She was calmer than Peak, but there was something in her voice that Kale had never heard before. Excitement. "When you lifted the hammer, it sent a signal. The architect systems beneath the station woke up. Doors that have been sealed for thousands of years are unlocking. The Academy scholars are pulling out records that no one has ever read. And those records," Ilindra said quietly, "are about humans." Kale stared at her. Ilindra stood at the foot of the bed with her arms crossed, her silver skin reflecting the medical bay lights. She did not look unfriendly. She looked shaken, like someone whose understanding of the world had been turned upside down and had not yet landed right side up. "The architects knew about your species," Ilindra continued. "Not by name. They called you something in their language. The closest translation is Rothan. It means those who endure. Their records say they searched the galaxy for millions of years, looking for a species that matched a specific set of criteria. Not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most gifted with energy or psionic talent. They were looking for the species that could suffer the most and still keep going." The room was quiet for a moment. "They were looking for us," Kale said. "Yes," Ilindra said, "and they built the Aegis as a key, a lock that only the right species could open. The hammer was never meant to test strength. It was meant to test endurance, willpower, the ability to hold on when your body is telling you to let go. Every species that tried was measured against that standard, and every species failed. Until you." Kale let this settle into her mind. She thought about the colony world she had grown up on, the hard work, the thin air, the days when there was not enough food and you worked anyway because the crops would not plant themselves. She thought about her mother, who had worked 18-hour days in the mining tunnels until her lungs gave out, and who had told Kale, with her last good breath, "Don't you ever stop." She had not stopped. She never had. But the galaxy outside the medical bay was not interested in quiet reflection. The news of what had happened in the Vault of Echoes spread across Thressia Prime within hours, and from there it jumped to the wider Galactic Union like fire through dry grass. A human, a member of the lowest-rated species in the Union, had done what no one had done in 6,000 years. The political effects were immediate and violent. The Sulthari High Council sent a formal message to the Academy within a day. They wanted to open diplomatic channels with humanity. They spoke of alliance, of partnership, of shared research into the architect legacy. The Sulthari were scholars at heart, and the idea that an entire branch of architect knowledge had been hidden, waiting for a species they had overlooked, fascinated them deeply. The Dravuni War Ministry reacted differently. They were a proud species, and their champion, Gorax, had been humbled in front of the entire Academy. Demands were made. The hammer should be confiscated and studied. The human cadets should be removed from the Academy pending investigation. Some voices in the Dravuni military called it a trick, a deception, some human technology that had fooled the ancient systems. But the most dangerous reaction came from the Veloxi. The Veloxi hegemony had dominated the Galactic Union for centuries. They held the most seats on the Union Council. They controlled the largest fleet. Their species filled the top ranks of every institution, including the Academy. The entire system, from the indexing process to the crucible rankings to the political structure of the Union itself, was built on the assumption that the Veloxi were the galaxy's natural leaders. And now a species they had classified as Tier 9, a species they had laughed at, had been chosen by the most advanced civilization in galactic history as something special, something the Veloxi were not. Behind closed doors, the Veloxi leadership was afraid, and afraid leaders are dangerous leaders. At the Academy, the effects rippled through every corridor. Rearguard Sigma went from being the joke of the school to being the most watched squad in the institution. Other cadets approached them in the hallways, some with curiosity, some with suspicion, some with a new and cautious respect. Gorax came to see Kale the day after she was released from the medical bay. He was enormous, towering over her, all 4 arms folded across his chest. He looked at her for a long time without speaking, his reptilian eyes unreadable. Then he uncrossed his arms and dipped his head, a Dravuni gesture that Kale knew meant acknowledgement between equals. "I pulled that hammer with everything I had," he said, "everything, and it did not move. You are smaller than one of my arms. How did you do it?" "I did not let go," Kale said. Gorax stared at her. Then he made a sound deep in his throat that might have been a laugh. "Humans," he said, and walked away, shaking his massive head. Ilindra formally requested a transfer to Rearguard Sigma. She left her elite squad, her high ranking, and her comfortable position to join the lowest ranked team in the Academy. When other Silthari asked her why, she said, "I would rather stand with someone who earned the impossible than sit with those who were handed the easy." Instructor Torvan came to see Kale on the 3rd day. He found her in the gym, already training again, despite the medical drone's protests. He watched her for a while from the doorway, his scarred face showing nothing. Then he walked in and stood in front of her. "I told you to go home," he said. "You did," Kale said. "I was wrong." The words came out rough, like they hurt him to say. "I have trained warriors for 40 years. I have seen cadets from every species in the Union. I have never been afraid of a student before." "Are you afraid of me?" "Yes," Torvan said. "Because I do not understand what you are. None of us do. And the things we do not understand are the things that change everything." He turned to leave, then stopped. "The Veloxi will not let this stand," he said, his voice low. "They cannot. Everything they have built depends on them being at the top, and you just showed the galaxy that the ranking was wrong. Watch your back, human." That night, Kale sat alone in her quarters and looked at her hands. She could feel the hammer. Even from here, even from floors and floors away, she could feel the Aegis of Rokan humming in the vault like a second heartbeat. It was connected to her now, bonded to her through whatever the architects had built into it. And it was not the only thing waking up. Across the galaxy, in ruins and vaults and sealed chambers, on 100 different worlds, architect systems were activating. Sensors were lighting up. Doors were unlocking. The Aegis had sent a signal when she lifted it, a pulse that traveled faster than light, and the ancient network was responding. Something was coming. Something that the architects had planned for 6,000 years ago. Something that required a species that could endure whatever came next. Kale closed her hands and felt the hum in her bones. She was ready. But in the dark spaces between the stars, a Veloxi warship changed course. On board, a team of elite operatives reviewed a file with a single image. A small human woman with blood on her face and fire in her eyes. Their orders were simple. Retrieve the Aegis. Eliminate the threat. At the academy, the alarms began to scream. The alarms tore through the station like a living thing, a high screaming sound that rattled the walls and shook dust from the ceiling. Red emergency lights flooded every corridor, turning the academy into a maze of shadows and sharp crimson edges. Kale was on her feet before the first alarm finished its cycle. She pulled on her boots, grabbed her jacket, and hit the door. In the hallway, cadets were stumbling out of their rooms, confused and half asleep, their faces lit red by the emergency lights. No one knew what was happening. The communication systems were dead. Every screen on the station showed static. Ront met her at the end of the corridor, his one hand already holding a toolkit he never went anywhere without. "Communications are jammed," he said, his single eye sharp and focused. "This is not a drill. Someone killed the network from inside." Peek and Daleth arrived seconds later, followed by Alindra, who was still fastening her uniform. Her silver skin pulsed faintly in the red light, a sign of stress in Silthari biology. "Veloxy," Alindra said. It was not a question. Kale nodded. Torvon had warned her. The hegemony could not let the truth about the architects and humanity spread. They could not let the hammer remain in human hands. So they had done what powerful people always do when the truth threatens their power. They had sent soldiers. The first explosion came from the lower levels. The floor shook, and somewhere below them, metal screamed as a bulkhead was blown apart. Cadets screamed too, scattering in every direction. There were no instructors in sight. The chain of command had been cut. "They will go for the vault," Kale said. "They want the Aegis." "Then we go to the vault," Daleth said. Her Melthari body had already shifted, her skin darkening and hardening as she prepared for a fight. Kale led them through the corridors, using the emergency stairwells because the elevators were locked down. As they descended, they found evidence of the attack. Scorch marks on the walls, broken doors, an instructor lying on the ground, unconscious, with a stun burn across his chest. Then they found Torvon. The old Dravuni was propped against a wall at the junction of two corridors. His scales were cracked and bleeding. His 3 good arms hung at his sides, and the stump of his 4th was leaking fluid. He had fought. The bodies of 2 Veloxy operatives lay in front of him, their black armor dented and torn. He had taken them down with his bare hands before a third had shot him from behind. Kale knelt beside him. "Instructor." Torvon opened his eyes. They were dim but steady. "There are at least 20 of them," he said, his voice thick. "Military grade, suppression weapons, shielded armor, the real thing. They have people inside the academy helping them. Some of the Veloxy staff opened the doors for them. Can you walk?" "No." He reached out with one trembling arm and gripped her shoulder. "But you can. Go. Get the hammer. It is the only thing on this station that can stop them." He paused, and something shifted in his eyes. "I told you once to go home. You told me no. I have never been more grateful for stubbornness in my life." Kale squeezed his arm, stood, and kept moving. They were not alone for long. As they pushed deeper into the station, other cadets found them, a pair of Jorvon scouts who had been tracking the attackers through the ventilation system. A Kreth engineering student who had rigged a whole section of corridor with electrical traps, using nothing but maintenance cables. And then, at the entrance to the lower levels, they found Gorax. The Dravuni champion was standing in the middle of a hallway with 4 unconscious Veloxy operatives at his feet. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts, and one of his 4 arms was hanging at a bad angle. But he was still standing, and when he saw Kale, he bared his teeth, and what she had learned was a Dravuni smile. "Human," he said, "I was hoping you would come this way." "Will you fight with us?" Kale asked. "I came here to learn who the strongest are," Gorax said. "I think I found my answer in that vault. Where you go, I follow. They pushed forward together, a ragged group of cadets from half a dozen species, led by the smallest person among them. The Veloxy strike team had expected to face confused, leaderless students. They had not expected organized resistance. They had certainly not expected a human woman who moved through the burning corridors like she had been fighting her whole life. Because she had. The battle through the lower levels was ugly and close. The Veloxy operatives were professionals, fast and precise. Their suppression weapons designed to drop targets without killing them. But Kale's group fought with everything they had. Elindra wove energy barriers that deflected stun rounds. Ront rewired door controls to seal corridors and trap attackers. Peak felt the vibrations of approaching enemies through the floor and warned them before every ambush. Dalit's density-shifted body absorbed hits that would have knocked anyone else flat. And Kale led. She did not have psionic power. She did not have energy weaving. She had a brain that would not stop thinking and a body that would not stop moving. She took hits. A stun round caught her in the left arm, and it went numb from shoulder to fingertips. She kept going. A concussion blast threw her into a wall, hard enough to crack the panel behind her. A Veloxy operative, twice her size, cornered her in a narrow corridor, and she broke his weapon arm with a strike to the nerve cluster she had studied in the library weeks ago, then used his own stun pistol to drop him. They reached the vault level. The massive doors were open. The Veloxy had already gotten inside. The chamber looked different now. The blue light from the walls was brighter, pulsing in a rhythm that matched Kale's heartbeat. The architect's symbols were blazing, and in the center of the room, on the cracked platform, the Aegis of Rokan was glowing like a star. A Veloxy commander stood before it. He was tall, even for his species, encased in powered armor that hummed with energy. Behind him stood his remaining operatives, 8 of them, weapons raised. He had been trying to take the hammer. The floor around the platform was scarred with tool marks and blast burns. The hammer had not moved. He turned when Kale entered and stared at her through his helmet's visor. "You," he said. His translator gave his voice a cold, clipped tone. "The anomaly. The lowest-ranked cadet in this institution." "Yes," Kale said. "This weapon belongs to the hegemony. It is an architect artifact of immense strategic value, and it will not remain in the hands of a primitive species that was not even spacefaring a century ago." Kale looked past him at the hammer. She could feel it calling to her, a deep vibration in her chest, in her blood, in the marrow of her bones. "It does not belong to you," she said. "It never did." The commander raised his weapon. "Then it belongs to no one." Kale moved. She did not run toward the commander. She ran toward the hammer. Stun rounds hit the air around her. Elindra threw up a barrier that caught 3 of them. Gorax roared and charged the operatives, scattering them like bowling pins. The chamber erupted into chaos. Kale reached the platform. The gravity hit her like a truck, and she staggered, her vision blurring. Her numb left arm hung useless at her side. Blood was already running from her nose, from the sheer pressure. She reached out with her right hand and grabbed the haft of the hammer. The gravity lock engaged. It was stronger this time, as if the hammer was asking her to prove herself again. The weight pressed down on her, crushing, enormous, a force that wanted to grind her into dust. She pulled with one arm. Her shoulders screamed. Her ribs shifted. Her vision went white with pain. She could hear the commander shouting orders behind her. She could hear fighting. She could hear Peak crying out, and Gorax roaring, and Elindra screaming words in Silthari that her translator could not keep up with. She pulled harder. The hammer rose. 1 inch, 6 inches, a foot. The light exploded from it again, brighter than before. A blinding white fire that filled the chamber and poured out through the doors and up the corridors of the academy. The harmonic tone returned, so deep and powerful that the walls cracked and the floor buckled. The Veloxy commander aimed his weapon at her back. Kale turned. She held the Aegis of Rokan in one hand, burning with 6,000 years of waiting, and she looked at the commander through eyes that were red with blood and white with light. "You measured us by what we lacked," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the hammer carried it, amplified it, sent it ringing through every speaker and every screen on the station. "You never thought to measure what we could survive." She brought the hammer down. She did not hit the commander. She drove the Aegis into the floor of the chamber with every ounce of strength and will she had left. The impact sent a gravitational pulse outward in every direction. It rippled through the vault, through the academy, through the entire station. Every weapon in the Veloxy strike team died at once, their power cells drained to nothing. Every operative dropped to the floor. Not hurt, just powerless. The pulse passed through walls and floors and bulkheads, and every piece of military hardware on the station went dark. But the pulse did not stop at the station. It traveled outward, faster than light, carried on the architect network that had been sleeping for 6,000 years. Across the galaxy, on 100 worlds, in 1,000 hidden places, ancient vaults opened, systems activated, lights came on in the darkness. The architects had left a gift for those who endure, and now, finally, the gift was being delivered. The Veloxy commander lay on the floor of the chamber, his dead armor pinning him down. He looked up at Kale, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be powerless. Kale stood over him, with the hammer resting on her shoulder, blood on her face, fire in her eyes, and the light of a dead civilization burning behind her. "We are human," she said. "We have always endured, and we are only getting started." 3 weeks later, Kale stood before the Galactic Union Assembly. The hall was vast, filled with representatives from every species in the Union. She was still healing. Her left arm was in a support brace. The blood had cleared from her eyes, but faint red lines remained, and the doctor said they might never fully fade. She did not give a long speech. Humans were not much for long speeches, she thought. She said what needed to be said, and then she stopped. The Veloxy hegemony faced sanctions. Their covert attack on the Academy was exposed, and their political grip on the Union began to crack. The indexing system was formally dismantled. Humanity was reclassified, not as Tier 9, not as Tier 1, but as something new. Something the old system had never had a category for. Back at the Academy, the crystalline ranking board rebooted. It had been damaged by the gravitational pulse, and when it came back online, it recalculated every ranking using the original architect parameters that had been buried and corrupted for thousands of years. Kale's name appeared at the top. She stood in the grand atrium and looked up at it. Her squad stood with her. Peak, who no longer flinched. Ront, who had saved a dozen cadets with one hand and a toolkit. Daleth, who had found her honor again. Ilindra, who had chosen courage over comfort. And Gorax, who had learned that the strongest person in the room was not always the biggest. They looked up at the board together, and Kale smiled. Not because she was first. She had never cared about being first. She smiled because the board was finally measuring the right thing. Not power, not speed, not the gifts you were born with. The will to rise.